Welcome to the Clutch Kitten Gaming Podcast, where I play an indie game for 5 hours and let you know whether or not it's worth your time and money. Hello and welcome everyone. This is James, also known as Clutch Kitten, and I am so glad that you're here for episode 47 of the show. Although this is a show about indie games, I have to mention that I've recently been playing Octopath Traveler on my Switch. I've been craving a meaty JRPG for a while now, and I think Octopath is starting to scratch that itch. It has such a unique art style, and I'm loving the conceit of the game so far. There are some weeks where I feel like I don't get a lot of gaming in outside of playing the game for the show, so it's been a really nice change of pace getting to play that at least a few hours this past week. Before we jump straight into news, I want to pass along a quick reminder about Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy the show and want to support what I'm doing here, make sure you pull up your Apple Podcasts app to give the show a 5-star review. Not only will you get a shout out here on the show, but you'll be helping the podcast reach a wider audience. Also, I'm sure you know this already, but I love to hear from you. Whether it's a critique, a question, a dare, or a comment about how the Face app makes me look like a wizard when I'm old, please feel free to send me all those thoughts to klutchkittengaming@gmail.com. Or, if you're more of a social media person, I'm quite active on Instagram, so don't be afraid to reach out at klutchkittengaming. In the news this week, again we get to talk about the Nintendo Switch. This time though, it's about the Switch Classic, or just the basic Switch. In August, Nintendo is going to be releasing a new Switch model with a longer battery life. Keep in mind that this will still be the basic Switch and will be priced the exact same. It's just going to have some more efficient hardware inside. Instead of having the current battery life of 2.5 to 6.5 hours, the new model's battery life will last between 4.5 to 9 hours. I don't think this is a reason to go buy a new Switch, but if you're looking to buy one in the next couple of weekends, I would just wait a tad bit longer to get this somewhat upgraded console. Let's move on now to this week's game. Today we're going to be talking about When Ski Lifts Go Wrong. This is a construction and management simulation game that has been in early access since 2017, but it was officially released on January 23rd of this year. It's currently available on PC and Switch and was developed by Huge Calf Studios. According to Twitter, Huge Calf is based in Manchester, England, and although I didn't find a lot of info about the studio, what I do know is that it's made up of 3 guys, Johnny, Andy, and Will, 2 of which are brothers, and the name Huge Calf comes from a mashup of all of their surnames. Currently, When Ski Lifts Go Wrong costs $14.99, and although I don't know the average time it takes to beat, there are over 100 unique levels in the campaign. On top of that, there's a sandbox mode that you can spend as long as you want in. Although the preferred way to control the game, I think, is mouse and keyboard, it does have gamepad functionality, and I haven't heard bad things about the Switch port in relation to the controls, so I'm guessing they found a way to make it work. Alright, let's move on now to the narrative. Today I don't have an intro because it's a little bit odd for us to look at 2 games in a row that have next to no narrative involved. But here we are. When Ski Lifts Go Wrong is about building a snow sports haven. Maybe you're a billionaire investor looking to provide his family with a dream destination, or maybe you're a dropout engineer finding employment amid a midlife crisis. The reason behind spending so much money on ski lifts isn't quite clear, but whatever the case, the mechanics are mostly untouched by the narrative influence. Although I don't think this game is set back extremely far due to the lack of context, I'll say a similar thing to what I said last episode with Clatter. I believe we live in a time where games need to take story more seriously. Luckily for Huge Calf, there aren't a ton of games in this genre vying for consumers' attention. However, it's not beyond belief that we'll be back here a year or two from now with a similar game that is clearly the better choice due to a well-written story. Of course, stories can be written and presented poorly, but assuming a development team does at least an acceptable job, I think the addition of a narrative, whether big or small, is always beneficial. Let's shift our focus now to the gameplay. So what is it that you do in when ski lifts go wrong? You know all those physicsy bridge building games that have been out for a long time? Well, this game is basically one of those, but with a little bit of a twist. Instead of trying to build strong enough bridges to allow semis to safely cross, you're building tracks for gondolas and ski lifts and T-bars. It's interesting because the concepts of the gameplay are fairly similar to all those bridge games, but the setting is actually a lot more exciting. Sure, building a bridge is great and all, but wouldn't you rather build a gigantic ski lift that will launch riders off into the stratosphere? Okay, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic, but the point remains the same. Building ski lifts is a lot more interesting than building bridges. I mentioned this earlier, but there are over 100 levels in this game. I haven't played through all of them yet, but I was pleasantly surprised by the variety in level style. Some levels require that you build a rope-type lift which keeps riders on the ground at all times. Some levels require that you build a ski jump. Other levels require that you build a gondola lift. Not only is there variety in the style of levels, but I found there to be a nice amount of challenge. There's always the opportunity to get 3 stars on a level, but that can only be obtained by doing the following. First, you have to complete the objective, which oftentimes is just to get 1 or 2 riders safely to the top of the lift. Second, you have to get a little star that's floating in the air. Basically, this forces you to build in a way that you may not have otherwise. Third, you have to stay within a certain budget. That was definitely the hardest one. Like many other similar games, the star mechanic was a positive way to introduce optional difficulty. There were some levels where I just wanted to mess around, and as long as I completed the main objective, I didn't have to care about the budget or the floating star. There were some levels though, where the challenge was motivating and interesting, and I could just choose to try and complete it if I wanted to. So we've talked a lot about the supporting systems, but how is the building? Overall, it was about what I expected. Whether that's a good or bad thing changes depending on your perspective, but for me it meant that HugeCalf made a satisfying game that works. The game provides a pretty nice difficulty ramp into some of those more complex pieces, and the main loop, the one where you're building and testing and building and testing and building again, that was enjoyable. One detail that I really appreciated was that the weak point in your build would be highlighted red after an unsuccessful attempt. Another thing that I appreciated was that after you placed a material, such as a log, you could right-click to drag it within a certain range. For me, that was nice because if my angle wasn't quite right on the first try, I didn't have to delete it and build a whole new log. If I was to offer up any complaints about the building, my primary frustration was in regards to the length of materials. In some cases, you're required to bridge a very deep gap, but the difficulty is that the materials are all relatively short. As such, you spend a ton of time linking together way too many small pieces, and it just felt tedious. There didn't seem to be a good reason why I wasn't allowed to stretch materials further. Despite that complaint, all in all, HugeCalf did a great job with the core mechanics. Not only was the building fun, but watching skiers ride the lifts was also entertaining. Sure, when a patron bumps a tree and falls to their bloody death, it does mean that you failed, but at least you can laugh a little bit at their demise before you go back to the drawing board. Now that we've talked about the narrative and gameplay, let's discuss the art and sound design. When Ski Lifts Goes Wrong has a very cute art style overall. It's low poly and colorful. This isn't a game you go to for a reimagined art style, but their choice to stick with the fun, cartoony feel was smart. It kept things lighthearted and made those moments where an entire gondola falls actually funny instead of horrifying. In terms of sound design, there isn't any VO in this game, there isn't any voiceover, but there is an incredibly cheery soundtrack. It's one of those games where you aren't surprised in the least by the music that's there, but that's actually a good thing. The music is upbeat and happy and not annoying or distracting. It was the perfect balance for this game. Now that we've made it through the narrative, gameplay, art and sound design, let's summarize with some positives and negatives. First off, on the positive side, the ski lift theme was a nice change from all those bridge builders on the market. Second, not only was it more exciting to be an architect on the side of a mountain, but HugeCalf did the genre justice with how the game played. It ran well, it was fun, and each level presented a good challenge. Third, the art and soundtrack are nothing to write home about, but they still rounded out the game in a satisfactory way. They don't give the impression that this game is more than it actually is. They prepare you for a fun, relaxing, and challenging experience. First off, on the negative side, I wish that some narrative elements had been added to the experience. I've been talking this to death over the past 2 episodes, but I have to mention it again. Second, although the building was relatively intuitive, I wanted materials to allow for longer extension. This wasn't a deal breaker for me, but there were some levels where it became an annoyance. We made it now to the final boss. This is the part of the podcast where I let you know whether you should slay the game and buy it, flee the game and avoid it, or farm up and wait for a sale. My verdict for when ski lifts go wrong is to slay this game. This is a perfect game to play while you're queued up for a round of Apex, or if you're wanting something challenging yet still lighthearted. There's more than $15 worth of content here, and if you're at all interested in the physics building genre, this game is definitely one to check out. As always, thank you all so much for taking the time to listen in. I had a lot of fun playing this game in preparation for the show, and I hope you had fun listening. If you end up buying or playing when ski lifts go wrong as a result of my recommendation, don't forget to let me know. Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? What was your favorite thing about it? I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and I'll see you in game.